Office of Wastewater Management. This program works with and manages a larger partnership between EPA and 18 other organizations under a formal Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU. Among other activities, the Decentralized MOU partnership spearheads our annual homeowner outreach and education program, Septic Smart Week, coming up in the third week in September. The MOU partnership works collaboratively at a national level to improve performance of septic systems and their decentralized wastewater alternatives, and to protect the nation's public health and water resources. You can learn more about the scope of EPA's decentralized program and the partnership by visiting epa.gov/septic. As part of the MOU partnership, we are pleased to sponsor this webinar. By way of introduction to today's topic, impacts of natural disasters are on the rise. And with at least 1 in every 5 homes and many businesses in the U.S. dependent on septic systems and decentralized alternatives, what are the implications regarding their vulnerabilities to these disasters, and how should affected communities respond? This webinar will cover new resources developed by the National Environmental Health Association, or NEHA, promoting key messages to populations dependent on decentralized systems across the U.S. We will also feature 2 case studies of large-scale natural disasters and their impacts on populations dependent on these decentralized wastewater systems. Coastal Connecticut's experience with Hurricane Irma in 2011 and Superstorm Sandy in 2012, and Puerto Rico's more recent ongoing recovery efforts after Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017. Today's case studies will explore lessons learned and actions being taken by officials in these communities. As many of you know only too well, June 1st kicked off hurricane season in the Atlantic Ocean. EPA maintains a hurricane readiness website that includes information for business operators on preventing and reporting chemical releases from such disasters. And local governments and communities can find suggestions there for preparing and protecting water and wastewater facilities, including decentralized wastewater, and what to do if your septic system fails. It's all at epa.gov/hurricanes. And you can also find information on dealing with other types of natural disasters at epa.gov/natural-disasters. The intended audience for this webinar includes local, state, and federal government officials, such as health officials and emergency response coordinators, as well as affected populations more generally. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to my co-moderator, David Richards, who will provide a few important details on the webinar technology and introduce today's speakers.
Great. Thanks, Don. My name is David Richards. I'm an EPA contractor with MDB, and I'll be handling the technical aspects of today's session. We will get underway in a few moments, but allow me to cover a few housekeeping items first. By now, you should have the GoToWebinar application running and should see the welcome slide on your screen. If you're having technical difficulties using GoToWebinar, please visit gotowebinar.com and click on Support in the upper right corner of the page. You also may submit a question via the GoToWebinar questions panel, and I will try to help you resolve your issue. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the webinar. Simply use the GoToWebinar control pane. You can type your questions in that area that says questions and then click to submit to the moderator. Please note that your GoToWebinar control panel may not be extended and may look like a small gray rectangle with little buttons. You will need to expand it so that you can be able to ask your question. To do so, click on the orange button at the top of the gray rectangle. All right. So the webinar will be in 3 segments with a brief question and answer period after each segment. First up will be Ayana Jones with the National Environmental Health Association, or NEHA. Ayana is a project coordinator at NEHA and works across a broad spectrum of program areas, including decentralized wastewater. She previously worked as an environmental health fellow at the American Public Health Association and as a county sanitarian in Ohio. The second segment will feature Sonia Marino, who serves as director of the Westbrook, Connecticut Health Department. Sonia is also a registered sanitarian and has spent the past 8 years working for local municipalities along the Connecticut shoreline, which are largely dependent on on-site wastewater systems. The third and final segment will feature Joel Blanco-González and Paul Faricelli. Joel is a sustainability advisor for Puerto Rico who is working on the Puerto Rico recovery plan for EPA and FEMA following Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017. Paul is a water advisor with EPA's Caribbean Environmental Protection Division in San Juan and will be coordinating efforts with FEMA, other agencies, the territory, and other various stakeholders to expedite the recovery from the hurricane. Now, before we hand things over to our speakers, Don and I have a few quick poll questions that will help us understand our audience better. Okay, so as you should see on your screen, our first poll question is to understand how many people are attending the webinar with you. Please respond by selecting one of the 4 choices below: just me, 2 to 4, 4 to 10, or more than 10. We will leave this poll open for a few seconds to let you put in your responses. Okay. All right, and so our responses so far, 92% voted and 89% said it was just you, and 10% said it was between 2 to 3 and 1% of 4 to 10. Now I will turn it over to Don for the next question.
Thanks, David. So I guess we couldn't push the results of the poll out for others to see. And that's fine. Appreciate you providing that, that feedback on how the poll went. The next question that will help us understand our audience better is, who do you primarily represent? And the choices are local government, state government, federal or tribal government, consultant or university/research, and lastly, other. We recognize that some of these are broad categories, but we're limited in the number of poll options we can provide. Okay, everyone, lock in your votes and counting down as we close the survey. 3, 2, 1. I feel like Steve Harvey. All right, survey says, and I can't see the results, but David, maybe you can tell us. Ah, here we go. Okay, so we have.
And I am able to share it. Sorry, I didn't do it for that other last one.
That's fine. And we can see the results up there. And at least a third of you represent local government. That's terrific. We have a good contingency representing state and federal as well. A good split of consultants, university research, and other. So thanks for participating in that. This is the last poll question before we're going to kick it over to our first speaker, Ayana Jones. But the last question, David, if you can push that one out, has to do with how you heard about today's webinar. Was it through the Decentralized MOU Partnership distribution list? Was it through EPA's NPS info non-point source discussion list? Was it through EPA's fairly new hazard mitigation discussion list, HAZMIT? Or maybe was it an invitation forwarded to you or other / unsure? And locking your choices, 3, 2, 1. Okay, survey says. So it looks like the largest group was from the Decentralized MOU Partnership distribution. That's good. The distribution must be doing something right then. And we encouraged folks to forward the invitation. And we see that most of you received that through some sort of a forward, whether it was decentralized, originally posted to a decentralized distribution or some other means, but we're glad that you're here now. So with that, I am ready to turn over today's webinar to our first speaker, NEHA's Ayana Jones. Ayana, at this point, you should be able to advance the slides on your own, although you may notice a slight lag as the internet creaks along to try to keep up with us. Take it away, Ayana.
All right, thank you, Don, and thank you, Dave, and the rest of the folks at EPA for allowing NEHA to participate on this webinar. We're proud to be a part of the Decentralized Wastewater MOU partnership. So today I'll be presenting on emergency preparedness resources for septic system users that we've developed here at NEHA. I am a project coordinator, and I oversee some of our wastewater projects. Just to give you a little background about myself. So let's see here. Might be a little bit of a lag here. Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. So NEHA is a nonprofit membership association that serves about 89 professionals. We provide credentials, so we have over 6,200 credential holders, mostly registered sanitarians and registered environmental health specialists, but we also provide credentials and certified foodborne outbreaks investigators, and also food safety auditor credentials. We also hold our annual conference. So we have an annual education conference and exhibition that brings together environmental health professionals from around the world. And so we learn and discuss current events and emerging environmental health topics each year. It's about a 3 to 4 day conference, and different professionals from all over, different agencies, industries, and different levels of government come to provide a unique perspective about how they fit into this universal language of environmental health. And so next month is our next conference. It'll be July 11th, and it's going to be held in Nashville, Tennessee this year. So if you are registered for that, we're excited to see you out there. We also have a Journal of Environmental Health, which we publish 10 times a year to our readers. And it keeps our readers up to date on current issues and new research, useful products and services, and also employment opportunities. And our journal reaches about 20,000 professionals that work to solve problems in areas such as air quality and drinking water, vector control, and such. So another great resource that we offer to our members and subscribers. NEHA also has 38 state affiliates that work more closely within the state, with state and local workforce. They help to recruit new members on behalf of NEHA as well. And then we have our web-based learning platform, which is our entire library of resources, including trainings, webinars, our e-learning course catalog. It's free to our active members, NEHA members, and it also can be used to earn continuing education credits towards NEHA's credentials. The goal of really our work is to advance and increase our workforce capacity. We offer different certificates as well, but NEHA is working in partnership with the CDC and Baylor University to gather information from environmental health professionals from health departments across the nation, really just assessing how we can improve the profession and practice of environmental health. And so we just published our first article in the Journal of Environmental Health. And so check that out. It's a really great, some great studies will be coming out of that research as well. So our members are mostly local governmental public health workers. We also serve folks at the state level of government. We also have members who are from private industry, 7 uniformed services, and also we have members from academic institutions as well. And so during today's presentation, I'll be discussing the importance of environmental preparedness for septic system users. I'll discuss NEHA's involvement in a project in septic system emergency preparedness. And lastly, I'll provide a few septic guidance tips in response or preparation for different disasters, some key tips that came out of the work that we did. And my colleague, Allison Schneider, who's also on this, I think she signed in as an attendee, but she participated mostly in this work and facilitated the work group committee. And she'll hop on a little bit later to answer some questions that you might have. And so for the background, why is it important that we are prepared for, or septic system users are prepared for disaster? Public health is particularly fragile after a disaster. In the general population, disaster events can impact public health in several ways, including severe injuries, communicable diseases, emotional trauma, along with increased morbidity and mortality associated with chronic diseases. And disasters can also cause damage to health facilities and water systems. It can contribute to food shortages, and increased population movements can also negatively impact public health. So the long-term effects, while septic system users are also contend with these public health threats, they're also more susceptible to long-term effects of a disaster. Firstly, septic system users septic systems can contaminate nearby drinking water sources, such as private wells. And residents are responsible for making sure their water for drinking is safe after a disaster, while for public system users, their water is routinely tested. So septic system repairs can be quite costly, especially if not done as soon as possible. And these issues can impact the family's financial well-being, which may also be stretched due to, just responding to the disaster event overall. So for emergency planning, programs for septic systems vary across the country. In most cases, public water systems are a bigger part of emergency planning in states and localities, so less resources are typically devoted for septic systems. And populations rely on septic systems, and that varies around the country. So that can include both in urban and rural communities. However, there is a concentration of septic systems in rural areas, and they may have less access to resources. So local health agencies in rural communities are typically smaller. They may have less funding or the ability to provide resources. And so that's another reason why this information is so important. And last but not least, education and awareness. Education and awareness among septic system users, it varies around the country. So some are unaware of how to respond to a disaster. They may not even know the specifics of the system that they have, that they're using, or they might not even know that they rely on a system at all. So we really need to increase the awareness of septic systems for users. So 20% of US homes, or 26.1 million households, rely on a septic system. The use of a septic system in the US is not going away. 22%, or 1.6 million of housing units that are less than 4 years old also have a septic system. So you couple that with the increased frequency of disaster events, and as you know, the potential for damage to septic systems will also increase. And if you look at this map, you can see that septic systems are prevalent in all areas of the country. So about 50% of septic systems are in rural areas. And again, that highlights the need for more resources among rural communities. So NEHA's role, NEHA is developing resources focused on safety for homeowners in a variety of disaster situations, namely the ones that we've talked about before that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. These resources are meant to point septic system users to basic educational resources, and provide guidance on preparing for and responding to these events. Above all else, our goal with these resources is to protect public health. They're meant to be a one-stop shop for safety. We're not advocating for septic system users to attempt complicated repairs or to make repairs on their own, but rather this is useful for letting septic system users know when to make a call to a professional, what steps to take to protect their septic systems and their families. So some states and localities and private organizations already have strong resources, although they might be regionally specific. This is a good tool to set a standard of best practices for each disaster. And this provides a framework or a template that's flexible. So this information can be expanded for industry or local state agencies. Local and state health departments can add their own branding to these tools, their own communication methods, permitting codes, and regional advice such as contamination risks. Say if they have, there's livestock or agricultural or gas and oil and gas activities in the area. This is meant to be a resource for health departments that do not already have a well-developed emergency preparedness program for septic system users. So NEHA formed the Septic System Preparedness Committee over a year ago, which is made up of professionals from federal agencies, state agencies, industry, academia, and nonprofits. And the committee met monthly to review existing best practices and create new materials. And some examples of contention that we worked through on the committee calls included whether or not we should include cesspool guidance, since most states don't allow cesspools, or whether or not we should include information on different types of septic systems in the same guidance document. So these are some things that the work group just discussed and worked through as they develop these tools. Okay, there we go. So for disaster impact and key septic guidance, septic system issues can include a floating or dislodged septic tank, exposed sewage, and potential contamination of drinking water sources. And as I mentioned before, 20% of US households use a septic system. For context, that's 30% or 2.6 million people in Florida, a state that's heavily impacted by hurricanes, that relies on a septic system. And so these are just a few tips from the preparedness documents that we created. This is by no means an exhaustive list of everything, but everything will be included in the guidance materials. And it just gives you an idea of what we created with these tools. So for the long term, when preparing for hurricanes, for the long term, we recommend making sure that the land around the manhole cover is sloped downwards so that surface water flows away from the system. And in terms of immediate response before the hurricane, it is recommended to turn off all of your electricity, your entire electricity system. After the power is off, waterproof all electrical connections to avoid electrical shock or damage to wiring, pumps, and the electrical system. And lastly, it's important to reduce water use in the house prior to a storm. So during a hurricane, a few tips include following emergency and evacuation advice for your area, eliminating all non-essential water use, and flushing toilets as little as possible if evacuation is not needed. And if the drain field becomes covered with water, don't use the system. Avoid contact with any standing water that may contain sewage. And in terms of response, hurricane response, some tips include roping off your septic system if it floods. There is danger of collapse for septic tanks. Always contact a septic system service professional for an inspection, and don't have the septic tank pumped under flooded conditions. Pumping it out could cause the tank to float out of the ground and cause damage. And a recently installed system may pop out of the ground on its own. And then lastly, avoid using the system and do not dig around the septic system while the soil is flooded. In case of a wildfire, septic systems may be damaged during wildfires if heavy equipment such as fire trucks are being driven or parked over the drain fields, or above ground components are severely burned. Both problems can lead to water contamination and system malfunctioning. So for wildfire preparedness, follow defensible space guidelines for buildings and wildfires. There is an app called the CAL FIRE app, which provides a guide to maintaining defensible space, including information on septic systems. I'm happy to share the link to that app after the presentation. Mark your system components with a fire-resistant marker, such as a rock. And immediately before, time permitting, turn off electricity to the system at the circuit breaker. And after the power is off, wrap control panels, plastic risers, and lids with a durable flame-resistant sheet plastic to protect them during the fire. During a wildfire, follow emergency and evacuation advice for your area. And eliminate all non-essential water use and flushing toilets as little as possible if evacuation is not needed. So for response, always consult with the septic system service provider. Stay out of the area if sewage backs up due to a system malfunction or excess water from firefighting efforts. And then reduce water use until the system is inspected or repaired. So other issues might include earthquakes or freezing temperatures and snow. And so for earthquakes, septic system components such as tanks can be damaged, which could lead to contamination. And then for winter weather, that could lead to frozen pipes, which means that the water is not pumping, pipes that burst, and then the septic tank itself can freeze. And this mostly affects cabins and summer homes. For other guidance for earthquake and winter weather response, checking for changes in how the septic system functions, be on alert for changes in how appliances drain, wet or unusual green spots in your yard, odors from your system, activated alarm lights and buzzers, and or changes in sounds from your mechanical components. Of course, contact a septic system service professional if any of these issues occur. And then when responding to freezing temperatures and snow, check for open, broken, or uncapped risers, inspection pipes, or manhole covers that may allow cold air in and cause freezing. Be careful around any openings to the system and contact a septic system service professional if any of these items need repair. Avoid compacting soil around the system. Compacted soil provides less insulation than uncompacted soil, and never allow vehicle traffic or livestock above the tanks or on the drain field. If your septic system freezes, call a septic system service professional. Please don't use any antifreeze or salt or a septic system additive to the system, and try to avoid running hot water continuously, or don't start a fire over the system or attempt to pump the sewage. Unless the cause of freezing is corrected, the system will most likely refreeze the next winter. And then some additional points of just general guidance. Know and document all of your components of your septic system. Take photos of the connections and septic system components. These photos will be helpful if the components are destroyed or if you need to replace them or file an insurance claim. Make sure all your photos and documents include the septic tank location, the septic system records or drawings, and then the electrical components as well. Get help from a septic system service professional, if any of these steps feel unsafe, or if you lose power. And then make sure you turn your power off to the septic system and all cords are unplugged before inspecting the area. There's a high risk and danger of electrical shock and damage to your septic system. So for next steps, the septic documents will be available by the end of this month. So we will be happy to share those with you once they're released. NEHA is also creating a similar guidance document for private wells, which will be available in the fall. We're also currently formulating a dissemination plan for these documents to spread the word around the country. We'll be using our social media channels, communication with our members through our journal, and also email blasts. But we'll also be working with you all and other partner organizations to promote these new materials. So the project is ongoing, and NEHA is hoping to update these materials once a year, every few years. So if you're interested in reviewing the materials, you can contact my colleague Allison Schneider or myself, and we will get you involved in that process. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Ayana. That was really great information. At this point, we will pause for a few minutes to give some time to let people put questions into the questions panel. And I'll turn it to Don.
Yeah, okay, hi, thanks. And nice job, Ayana, presenting the content. And I think you said that NEHA is preparing a set of resources you just presented on that should be available by the end of this month, June. So just to sort of drill down a little bit, where can people find them? If they go to NEHA's website, will there be a link to those resources, or do they need to go to a particular place to find them?
No, they'll be directly available on our website, and I can share the specific link, but they'll be under our EH topics and under our water quality tab. So when they are released, they'll probably be on the main page, the main landing page. But to find more information, they'll be under our EH topics tab. And so that
would be neha.org, NEHA.org. Is that correct?
Yes, neha.org, /EH-topics, and then you'll see a tab there for water quality. And I can give you Don, I'll give you the direct link to include. Okay.
And I'm sure in your dissemination plan, you will have all that information too. So, yes. And you'll be working with us and our decentralized MOU partners to get the word out, among others, I'm sure.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So, David, unless I'm missing something, I don't see any questions at this point. This is not our last bite at the apple. We're going to open up for questions at the end of each segment, and the next segment would be over to talk about what Connecticut has walked through with their coastal storms earlier this decade, and then we'll go over to what's been happening with the recovery efforts in Puerto Rico. So there'll be a few more bites of the apple. So I don't see any more. So at this point, I think we're ready to hear from our second speaker, Sonia Marino, and the first case study on what coastal Connecticut experiences have been regarding two large coastal storms in 2011 and 2012. So Sonia, at this point, you should have full control of your slides now. And just as a reminder, there will be a lag in moving your slide forward and what is seen by the folks watching through the webinar. But just so you're aware of that, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. Well, hello. My name is Sonia Marino, and I've lived near Long Island Sound for the majority of my life. I've worked in local health for approximately 10 years, and about 8 years ago, I got a job in a health department that was in an area on the shoreline near the Connecticut River that is completely dependent on on-site wastewater management. Since then, I've hopped along the shoreline working in towns in that general area. I currently work in a town that is similar in makeup on the shoreline and is dependent on septic. It's also close to where I worked during Irene and Superstorm Sandy. The story I'm going to tell consists of compilation of pictures from the area and comments after talking to some colleagues I worked with at the time, and statements from other people's experience, such as Public Works, Selectmen, and Inland Wetlands. Connecticut is about 30 to 40% dependent on on-site wastewater management. You might think all septic is the same, but maybe not this crowd. But from my experience, there's septic in Connecticut, and then there is shoreline septic. Having worked in both areas, there are advantages and disadvantages to both. However, I personally think there are two completely different skill sets. Repairs on the shoreline are often on densely populated small lots with extremely permeable soils, high groundwater, filled in wetlands, the threat of sea level rise, increase of flooding, and coastal jurisdiction lines only a few feet away. I currently work in this town, Westbrook, Connecticut, which was similar to where I worked in Superstorm Sandy and Irene. There are areas in Westbrook that are extremely low-lying, that are prone to just normal flooding. And please keep in mind that some of these properties that are now built on would not be built on today if they had to adhere to current regulations from various departments and agencies. A lot of the properties down here were intended as summer homes. And at one point, it was not desirable to live by the water, just to vacation by it. Today, however, even with the threats I mentioned above, a lot of people now want to live directly on the water. I can go on and on about the 40-year-plus history in the area. There's literally thousands of pages of engineering assessments and reports, but I think that might take a bit away from this presentation. Suffice it to say, there's no sewer connection in the area, and there are a lot of opinions on how to fix this or if it needs to be fixed at all. I want to mention this because decades have gone by and extensive studies have been done. And in all this time, septic systems continue to be repaired. We in local health cannot ignore a septic system that needs to be repaired. I can't talk about Superstorm Sandy until I lay the groundwork with Irene. This picture is actually down the road from my house, not where I work. In Connecticut, there were quite a lot of homes that were destroyed in Irene, and a few were literally washed away, a couple of blocks away from my own house. After witnessing this, I went into work. This was an adventure in itself. Talk about a fun ride traveling down Interstate 95. At the time, all I kept on thinking of what I was going to be walking into. I lived in a more urban area. I was worried about what I would be walking into in an area that was reliant completely on septic. I had been in the district for about a year and a half, and still a newbie learning from some pretty knowledgeable sanitarians and my director. There was no power anywhere. We met outside at one of the municipalities and brainstormed how to go forward. It was a small district with 4 field staff, and that included the director. I learned right there and then that as a director, sometimes you just got to put your boots on and get out there with your staff. I believe that to this day. I believe our response plan was instinctive because of the way we just naturally work on the shoreline, and it worked. Wendy, one of my colleagues, stated it best. We just divided up the areas and the staff so we can get out in the field as soon as possible. We just knew what we needed to do. I believe we kind of did this by accident. When we initially met, it was to discuss who was going with whom and what areas each team would take on. To me, everything was different before Irene and Sandy. There just wasn't that hurricane public health emergency preparedness push in Connecticut before then. Since this webinar is on a national level, before I go into the pictures, I wanted to briefly explain some of the responsibilities a Connecticut local health department has in an event such as this one. States are different in how their agencies are set up and who is responsible for what. In Connecticut, on-site individual septic is under local health with Department of Public Health Environmental Engineering Program support. In Connecticut, the jurisdictional oversight for over 75,000 gallons per day, or back then 5,000 gallons per day, is under the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, as well as AT and community systems. However, the director is still responsible for public health and prevention. Therefore, local health is where the boots hit the ground, the eyes and the ears in real time. We have a lot of community systems and ATs, or community systems in Westbrook, in the area I worked. We just kept an eye on them. This slide is definitely not all inclusive of what Connecticut health departments do. You will see that there's a huge list, and this can all happen before, during, and after the storms. I would like to point out that some health departments have a lot of food service establishments. Some are dependent on septic, others have old housing stock, and some have a ton of transient water systems. That being said, all departments are different, and I have to give a ton of credit for the directors and the sanitarians out there that know their area and know how to keep their community safe. The first thing we had to do after strategizing was develop a form and get out there to the food service establishments. There was no power, so we had to ensure that they had a backup power source or that the foods were being destroyed properly. We also had to ensure there was no sewage backups, and at that time, we did not have a list of who had a pump system in a restaurant. I'm only mentioning this because time was ticking and we had to prioritize and get out to do our sanitary assessments on our low-lying areas as soon as possible. Remember, all of this was new to us. It's August and the end of what we call the season in our area. In our area, the population in these shoreline towns double, sometimes even triple from Memorial Day to Labor Day. We also have a higher population of renters at that time. Even though the water had substantially receded by that time, there was sand everywhere, and I mean literally everywhere. I remember seeing residents, town workers, contractors, installers, excavators, trucks, people just walking around with a dazed look on their face, wanting to help or clean up their properties, but not really sure, not really knowing what to do. What was safe to even touch? As I go through the septic slide pictures, I will talk about some of the lessons we learned. We saw a ton of broken sewer pipes. We saw a lot of Orangeburg. I believe at the time we even waived the health department fees for permits and soil testing for the immediate fixes. We made it a priority to get out there, inspect, as well as document what we saw. Yes, we still have some cesspools. Not many, but they do exist in some areas. Connecticut does not allow for new cesspools to be installed, but we still have some out there. A lot of times they get replaced when a house is sold, a renovation, or a tear down rebuild. The town I currently work in has an ordinance that is more stringent than the health code. So a lot of them were replaced during the rebuild efforts. The majority of the towns in the shoreline area have more stringent ordinances in place that are specific to their own towns. A tank, this is just a picture of a tank, and basically all the sand just blew away from it. Wendy, she's one of my co-workers at the time, and one of the photographers of a few of these pictures, stated a few things when I asked her for comments on her lessons learned. One of the things that she said was that she noticed that to enlist the help of the installers, the excavators, the contractors working in the area, they were so helpful with locating washed out systems and other things that the department may not have had on record before they got covered over. Please keep that statement in mind. Also, we talked to the residents as we walked the damaged areas. Again, we kind of did this by instinct, by accident, whatever, but I believe it helped reassure the residents that the health department was on top of things. We were a reassuring presence out there. Look at how new that septic tank looks. I mean, the stamp is still fresh. Wendy's statement reminded me of a significant lesson I learned that day. Fostering good relationships is a key component to preparedness. To always work hand in hand with our building official, the fire marshal, and the public works department. As soon as my team arrived in the first area, the building official was able to tell us what was hit the worst and what he observed. This was extremely helpful. This particular building official also happened to have an RS and was a PE. You never know, so just listen. We should never be so arrogant that we think we know what's best and not take the help and insight when it is freely given. Since we couldn't get out there immediately, they were our eyes and ears. Yes, we still have dry wells. I'm not sure if those are half dry wells or full dry wells, but that was a big fix in this area, decades ago. This is one of my favorite pictures. You can see the stone out there. Obviously, it was taken out. Erosion, sand just blew off. Documentation is extremely important. As I look at my old notes and pictures, I'm reminded why I've done things the way that I do them now. So how many systems do you think were covered before we actually got out there? Hopefully not too many. Remember when I stated that we work closely with our contractors and installers, building officials, public works. That was an essential key component of finding out if systems were covered over before we got out there. So do you think we learned anything? Superstorm Sandy. Literally a few months past the one-year anniversary of Irene, we got hit with Superstorm Sandy, also dubbed Frankenstorm. It was the end of October, and that made a difference. The population in our area, in general, was at a normal yearly level. However, that also meant a lot of the homes were not occupied. A lot of times, seasonal property owners will secure their homes before leaving for the winter, but that doesn't always mean that they prepare it for a massive storm. There were some who were able to get down to secure their properties, but not a lot. Plus, it's not something that we would encourage or have them place themselves in danger right before a storm. The point on this one is to think ahead. Yes, we did learn from Irene, and we were more prepared. There was no need to meet right before, since we had discussed the method of attack before leaving work, before the storm. We had gone over different scenarios and had already planned who was going where. We had notified the food service establishments prior about power outages. We had our bags packed with our quick forms that we had developed in Irene. Basically, everything a sanitarian needed was in our car. This is essential because we were down a director, and the chief sanitarian was the acting director, and our team of 4 went down to 3. Take a look at the strap-down tanks. Going forward, we were more diligent about highly recommending or even requiring anti-buoyancy provisions, watertight tank seals, watertight risers to grade, and testing for leakage to ensure water tightness in certain areas. Even though sometimes certain provisions are not required by Connecticut's code, a simple discussion with the engineer or installer can remind them that debris and sediment can get into the plumbing and or the tank during and after a storm. Thinking ahead and being a little more stringent can save a lot of headache for everyone. Oh, sorry. Okay. This is more of a close-up picture of a tank that's striped down. This is one of my favorite pictures. Apparently, we didn't get to see every system uncovered during Irene. This one was uncovered in Sandy. And yes, that is a 4x4 that's acting like a tank. And I'm pretty sure that it's connecting in 2 buildings. It was fixed after the storm. In coastal areas of Connecticut, we do now require groundwater monitoring throughout tide cycles in areas that are tidally impacted, and the separation distance is increased. This is the picture of just the flooding in the area in 2012. This is a picture of one of the houses that got a repair recently. This was where it was located in 2012 during Sandy. The actual system was below the house. The house is on piers. And you can see, if you see on the side of this picture right here, you can see that there's tidal wetlands right behind it. Today's pictures now, the system was replaced. It was a seasonal cottage, 1 bedroom. It's still a seasonal 1-bedroom cottage, and there's exceptions all over the place. We've had to work hand in hand with other health departments in the area, discussing good options, best repair options, works with the engineers, and the biggest support and the most help we get is from the environmental engineering program at the state. These are not easy plans to review. This is just in 2018, after a high tide and a storm. And this is the area that are one of our low-lying areas. It's flooding. But it's not just the septic systems that are flooding, it's also the roads that are flooding. Okay, this is another area in Westbrook that's low-lying. We've had a lot of complaints from some of the residents about the roads being flooded. One of my points here is that we really need to work with all the different departments to try to fix these type of situations in more of a holistic approach. It's not just the septic systems, it's not just the houses, it's also the roads. But we should all be at that table together discussing the best possible solutions and options. This right here was this year, and it was just after a heavy rain and normal tide, and a high tide. The picture next to it is just a normal, everyday tide. This is these three pictures is a repair that was done recently. And you can see in the first picture right here that behind there is, again, tidal wetlands, and it's flat. So the system had to be repaired. The house is across the street. They had to get an exception from the state of Connecticut and also from the town to cross the road and put the house, the septic system across the street. Right here, all of that old junk fill, because it was filled in wetlands, was taken out and new septic fill was put in. Clearly, there's a lot of flooding issues here and tidal issues here. So the systems had to be raised. And you can't really see all the way back here, but that's about a good 2 to 3 feet difference in elevation from the top of that retaining wall down to the driveway right there. At this time, a few of the things, the statements I would like to make, or a few statements I got from my colleagues. One of them was from Wendy Arnold Brown. Again, she was one of the people who took a lot of the pictures and very good at that. Bottom line, preparation, quick response, and documentation. Money spent on these with respect to septic systems on the shoreline will be well worth it in light of sea level rise. More manpower, coordination, and training at the state level would help facilitate this. In Westbrook, we work directly with our Water Pollution Control Authority. It's the health department and the WPCA together. We have a WPCA technician who is amazing. Documentation is key. One of the recommendations Wendy had also made was about GIS and mapping, and that is something that we had been thinking about as well. Trying to put an approximate area of where septic system locations are on people's properties for internal office use only. We also document soil conditions. We, with pictures, when we do our septic system installs, we make sure that that the pictures and the inspection reports are in the file, noting every variance or exception that is needed or granted is recorded. Another comment that Scott, who was also one of my colleagues over where I worked before, said that he believed that the experience that the three of us, and well, actually 4 of us in Irene, educated us to increase our knowledge of the vulnerable areas in our shoreline towns and to really protect them. The other thing that we do in Westbrook is that we are redoing our ordinance to be more stringent in the health code, and specifically in certain areas on the shoreline that are tear down rebuilds or just adding accessory structures and whatnot. So that's our message, to make sure you do everything and try to do interdepartmental when you're working with these rebuild projects. Work with the agencies, state agencies like DPH and our inland wetlands and our tidal wetlands, work with DEP. Getting the message out before the storm happens, such as, making sure not, like Ayana had said, not driving over our septic systems and being careful of them and conserving water, working with our emergency management director to get those key messages out immediately before the storm. Also, don't do things piecemeal. So, like, for example, the road, making sure that we are at the same table when they're talking about elevating a road and what implications that could possibly have on the septic systems that are on the properties all over down there. I think that will include it. So do you have any questions?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sonia. That was all really interesting. And just a reminder, there should be a GoToWebinar questions box, and we will leave that open for you all to put in questions for Sonia's presentation. So please, you can do that now. And now to Don.
Okay, well, we'll have another opportunity for questions at the end. At this point, we're going to move to our final segment to hear about Puerto Rico and their experience, particularly around the recovery effort from the 2017 hurricanes. It was a brutal season. So we have two speakers for this segment. First, we'll hear from Joel Blanco-González, who just got back from Puerto Rico, where he had been for a while. And Joel will be followed by Paul Ferricelli, who is still place-based in Puerto Rico, as we say. So Joel, at this point, I believe you're going first. You should have full control of your slides, and let us know when you're ready to hand it off to Paul so we can shift control over to him. Take it away, Joel.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity. I'm Joel Blanco, Sustainability Advisor for Puerto Rico, to FEMA and EPA. I am back at EPA Region 3 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And so I had the opportunity to assist people in need in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And one of the purposes of this presentation is that we would like to share our areas of concern and also to learn from you, to learn from your lesson learned for moving forward. As Don mentioned, this presentation is divided into two. The first, I will be the speaker. I will be talking about the work group development, and Paul will be talking about action plan development. Without further ado, I shall begin. So, in its continuing efforts to help the Caribbean recover from the long-term impacts from Hurricanes Irma and Maria, in December 2018, the U.S. EPA launched an initiative to help make septic systems more sustainable and resilient. The Caribbean Septic System Work Group is engaging communities, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies to bring about real solutions for the residents of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Septic systems that are properly planned, designed, sited, installed, operated, and maintained can provide excellent wastewater treatment. However, systems that are sited in densities that exceed the treatment capacity of regional soils and systems that are poorly designed, installed, operated, or maintained can cause problems, which is the issue in the Caribbean. Over 40% of the population living in Puerto Rico rely upon septic systems to dispose of domestic wastewater. Although Puerto Rico Aqueduct and Sewer Authority, hereinafter referred as PRASA, provides centralized wastewater collection and treatment services to approximately 60% of Puerto Rico's population. It is estimated that 25% of the population will never be served by PRASA centralized system due to many constraints. Furthermore, it has been estimated that as many as 85% of existing septic systems in Puerto Rico are substandard or malfunctioning, resulting in environmental, public health, and quality of life impacts. Here is a map illustrating communities with no sewer connections in Puerto Rico. It is our understanding that these communities employ septic systems or any other practices to dispose domestic wastewater. With respect to U.S. Virgin Islands, over 50% of the population living in the U.S. Virgin Islands relied upon septic system or wastewater management. The prevalence of the septic systems is due to limited resources, soil conditions, and the lack of wastewater systems, including sewage piping and wastewater treatment plants. Now, you will be having the opportunity to visualize some photos from Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria, the devastation that happened in the Caribbean. Here is a photo of flooding, and so septic systems in Puerto Rico collapsed due to oversaturation of soils, among many other constraints. Here you have septic systems, a household septic system in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, a typical construction and design. Also, another illustration of a septic system with piping coming out of the house. Here, unfortunately, you can certainly see illegal bypassing coming from septic systems in Puerto Rico and in the U.S. Virgin Islands. If you can see the bypassing, it is not the way to go. Also, another illustration with the piping actually discharging directly to the river, coming out the septic system, which is considered an illegal bypassing. Here, another septic system with piping and an illegal bypassing as well. Another example of illegal bypassing and piping. Piping and placement. And so, how we develop the work group and the things that we did take into consideration for moving forward. We thought about a strategic planning because this was and is a legacy issue in Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. We have to take into account innovation, clarity, and consensus between stakeholders, counterparts, and clients. We have to assess regulations, applicable regulations, permitting and compliance, and so forth and so on. So as part of the strategic planning, there are ongoing efforts that can be optimized or will be completed to help address septic system-related issues in the Caribbean. Opportunities exist to optimize the integration of the Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act authorized programs to include consistency and consensus among stakeholders and government counterparts on the most appropriate policy and management decisions, including priority projects and community outreach approaches. We have identified several vulnerabilities, stressors, repercussions related to septic systems in the Caribbean. To mention a few, I would like to go back to the wait. I would like to go back like 4 slides.
You need to go back? Okay,
yes. There.
Okay, this one?
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. So,
okay.
As mentioned before, vulnerabilities,
yeah.
Tropical flooding, oversaturation of soils, erosion, stressors, as part of the strategic planning, design, construction, operation, and maintenance of septic systems, following applicable regulations, including building codes. Repercussions, surface water, groundwater, drinking water. And as part of the strategic planning, we have to ensure to have an integrated resource management, taking into consideration efficiency, efficacy, identifying the deliverables, describing measures, leveraging resources, setting timeframes to ensure consistency and consensus as mentioned before. Due to the complexity of these areas, the Caribbean Environmental Protection Division from US EPA Region 2 established a working group to facilitate coordination and integration of stakeholders and counterparts to ensure that various strategies and work plans promote resiliency and sustainability, maximize desired outcomes, and leverage resources for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Now you have the opportunity to visualize our partners, our key partners. So EPA does not protect the environment on its own. It works with businesses, nonprofit organizations, and state and local governments through partnerships. The Caribbean Septic System Work Group is composed of federal government, state and local stakeholders, counterparts, and clients, including EPA headquarters, EPA Region 2, EPA Region 9, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, U.S. Geological Survey, to mention the state and local government, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Department of Planning and Natural Resources, Puerto Rico Department of Natural and Environmental Resources, Puerto Rico Department of Health, Puerto Rico Office of Permits Management, Puerto Rico Planning Board, Puerto Rico Housing Department, and Hawaii Department of Health, Office and Environmental Quality. It is my understanding that now, Paul, it's your turn, so please go ahead.
So, Paul, if you are speaking, this is Don Waye. Maybe you have yourself on mute. We'll give you another 10 seconds or so. If we don't hear from you, Joel, are you able to go through the slides that Paul had planned to present?
Sure thing,
I'm connected. Hi, this is Paul. Do you hear me?
Hi, Paul. Welcome. Yes.
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
I am connected. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Paul. And you should be able to advance the slides at this point as well.
No, I'm not having control right now of the slides.
Okay. Go ahead and start. And David, if you could control the slides for Paul, and we'll try to sync it up, right?
Yes. So.
Wait a second, Paul. So I missed this. Apologize. Technical difficulties, as well as we have on board the academia and the non-governmental organization. Just to mention a few: University of Puerto Rico at Maya West, Polytechnic University of Puerto Rico, and all the private and public academia in Puerto Rico. And with respect to the NGOs, so we have El Estuario de San Juan, RCAP Solutions, just to mention a few, and the USVI Coral Bay Community Council.
Okay, so moving forward, moving to the next slide. Yes. So once the work group, was established, so one of the exercises that we did was to review and acknowledge, lessons learned from previous efforts related to septic systems. At EPA Region 2, there was a previous effort called the Watershed Stewardship Program that will follow sort of like the same rationale of establishing partnership with stakeholders and also state agencies. At that point in time, EPA was able to establish a coalition with the Puerto Rico Department of Natural Resources, the Puerto Rico Environmental Quality Board, and also the Puerto Rico Water and Sewer Authority, PRASA, which is the main provider of sanitary services in Puerto Rico. And that was a very successful effort, just that after approximately 5 to 7 years, so no funds were longer available at that point in time. Therefore, that effort sort of like stopped. But one of the lessons learned that helped and to establish this new working group was to sort of like understand what were the lessons learned, but also what were the challenges that are known when we're talking about septic systems and decentralized wastewater management. And one of them is permitting. I mean, in Puerto Rico, the permitting process have identified shortfalls. So it's necessary, to address those, incorporating strategies and updates to building codes, and also a framework that can promote best management practices from the permitting perspective. Also, that effort taught us that there's a lot of lack of consensus among different state agencies and what is the jurisdiction of each one, and I think it's just a matter of finding consensus among those state players that have jurisdiction on decentralized systems. At that point in time, was established that the existing laws and regulations are sufficient, but again, there's lack of consensus when the jurisdiction of one agency ends and the other one starts. Because of this condition, at that point in time, it was established that the homeowner awareness model was the most practical and reasonable management strategy to address septic system issues. And basically, this is bringing educational resources to septic system homeowners so they can properly use and maintain their septic system. Also, outreach and deterrence were things that were identified that things that needed to be addressed to promote changes on public behavior through education and also like deterrent measures, enforcement type of measures. Short-term steps are relatively that could be relatively inexpensive, can really make a significant reduction of pollution, and these were identified strategies that were proved through pilot studies that could be done at the community level to reduce pollution from septic systems. And certainly funding was necessary. Again, it was key, to maintain this 5 to 7 year effort that previously was established. So moving forward to the next slide. Okay, so how do we fit these lessons learned in different areas of interest? So within the working group, we established several focus groups, and one of them is the public policy focus group. And the goal and the mission of these focus groups is to facilitate the discussions at the government level to leverage a shift in public policy. As I just mentioned, there is lack of consensus of jurisdictional interaction from state agencies. There also the permitting process need to be improved. Building codes need to be updated and need to be enforced. So and these are things that could help the recovery of septic systems previous a disaster and after a disaster. So therefore, the goal of this focus group is to bring and facilitate these type of discussions and push the conversation at the state level to leverage a shift in public policy. The technical support, certainly a lot of the septic system Technology depends on specific site conditions, specifically like soil conditions. And in Puerto Rico, we have a very diverse soil spectrum. So therefore, the technical support team focus group, will provide technical support and technology and to support technology and innovation endeavors. And as the lessons learned taught us, certainly we need to engage the community. We need to engage the community. So that's why we established a focus group, the community outreach focus group, that will be engaging with the public and professional groups to build capacity and situational awareness. Next slide, please. And then after we establish these focus groups, so then we discuss with our partners, state agencies, NGOs, experts in the area, and also we look at our own EPA resources. What can be done with the resources that we have right now? So that's why we developed sort of like a roadmap of specific activities that we believed could be done with the resources currently available. And this is a way to leverage, the partnerships built with the NGOs, state agencies, and certainly taking advantage of funds opportunities that are available after a disaster. So one of them, the policy group will be establishing a partnership, to secure human and financial resources for the continuity of the focus group, and also leverage the incorporation of protocols to address shortfalls in the territory permitting process. One of the outcomes of the watershed stewardship program was the development of protocols that would help to address the permitting the permitting process shortfalls. So one of the things that we want to push at in the conversation and discuss at the state level is incorporated those protocols that were identified as helpful to address permitting shortfalls. We want to leverage and support coordination of funds for proper installation and repair and upgrades of septic systems, especially using federal funds. EPA has funds for repairs of septic systems, the State Revolving Fund, USDA. So that's the thing. I mean, after the disaster, and also through the supplemental appropriations, there are now a lot of opportunities, fund opportunities, for repairs, replacement, and upgrades of septic systems. We have partnered also with academia, and one project that we're going to be providing support through the technical support focus group is the development of a geospatial model to prioritize environmental risk factors from unsewered communities. We also have partnered with the San Juan Bay Estuary. That's an NGO that has focus on water quality in the San Juan Bay Estuary. And the thing is that as part of the response efforts after Hurricane Maria, this NGO was able to provide assistance for the cleanup and pump out of sewage systems, and also, they were able to provide assessment of the structural integrity of septic system. And now, based on their findings, we have partnered with them, to provide support on addressing those findings. In terms of like community engagement, we have partnered with the Professional College of Engineers and Land Surveyors of Puerto Rico to develop a training that can bring awareness about building codes requirements, permitting requirements, and also technology available for within the septic system area. And also we found that there's also a need, and we're going to be working to address it, of building capacity of this topic within the federal family and territory agencies. So through the community outreach focus group and using the expertise from our fellow partners, we want to facilitate and build capacity on this topic within the different federal agencies. Certainly, one thing that we want to do, and we encourage every government to do, is to implement and manage the EPA Septic Smart program, and certainly doing this in partnership with the government of Puerto Rico, because that's the thing. I mean, this is a strategy that help build capacity, help to promote engagement with the community, and bring awareness on this topic and what are the best management practices. And right now, again, I mean, the disaster has brought all these opportunities that we aim to take advantage, but most certainly has brought the urgency of addressing this issue. Therefore, there are a lot of interested at the state level, NGOs, in the federal family to address it, and this is how we think we can, at least in the short term, provide recovery on septic systems after the disaster. Joel, back to you.
Thank you, Paul. As part of our closing remarks, so I would like to express our appreciation to EPA headquarters and the Septic Smart program to assist us, as well as the government of Puerto Rico and the government of U.S. Virgin Islands, as well as EPA regional offices, federal partners, the state of Hawaii, and the agencies in Hawaii as well, and other partners, NGOs and the academia. And we would like to, as part of our closing remarks, so we would like to say that the Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act are the fundamental building blocks for clean water and safe drinking water in the United States and its territories. We should use them to great advantage to improve water quality and protect drinking water and secure tangible environmental results. To all of you, including ourselves, keep building on a result-first approach, and also we have to acknowledge, and we are so proud to convene our partners to work together to strengthen management of septic systems in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, using the relationships forged in hurricane response efforts as a vehicle for transforming communities through community-driven solutions. So to protect human health and the environment, and now we would like to learn from you. Like, if you have any questions, please provide us with your question, and also we would like to learn your lesson learned for moving forward. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
So this is Don Waye, and
great. Thank you so much, Paul and Joel. It was really, really powerful. Yep.
Yeah, if you can hear me, this is Don Waye. I have a question for Paul and Joel.
Yep.
And so you had talked about community-driven solutions and a roadmap to recovery and developing protocols. And we want to understand lessons learned through walking through these experiences. And I don't know if this is completely answerable just from the Puerto Rico perspective alone, but I'm wondering if there's an idea that EPA Region 2 has on whether the situation in Puerto Rico is so different than elsewhere in the U.S. that the lessons learned there won't be terribly applicable elsewhere in the U.S., or do you think they will be applicable elsewhere in the U.S.?
I can have the first chance here. So it is different indeed. First, so we are talking like Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, so the Caribbean. They are islands. So the topography is different. The composition of the soil, physically and chemically, are different. Just to mention a few, the water level is different. The oversaturation is different. Soil types and so forth and so on. So one of the things that as a lesson learned from previous experiences was like one of the reasons why we partnered with like hand in hand with the state of Hawaii and other islands. The reason why was because of the similarities of topography, constraint, variables, stressors, and so forth and so on. And we have been comparing some of the technologies employed on the mainland. And one of the projects, the model projects, is to replicate and to test best management practices to ensure protection of human health and the environment by taking into account the site-specific conditions of the islands. So that's what I have to say about that one.
Yes, and this is Paul. If I may add to that, and as you mentioned, you know, our focus is to have community-based solutions, you know, to address these issues. So certainly each community is unique in nature. Nonetheless, the challenges are very similar. And as Joel mentioned, you know, when we look at what's happening in Hawaii and also when we look what is happening in USPI, the permitting process can improve. Updates of building codes are necessary. Consensus among the stakeholders and new policies need to be brought up, you know, to bring deterrence of improper operation and management of septic systems, but also you know, changes in behavior, among the communities. So in that aspect, Don, there are similarities, but certainly, you know, the specific solutions at the community level will be unique.
And also, echoing Paul's comment. So yes, indeed, there are similarities that we can take into consideration, and we can interpolate or extrapolate solutions based on site-specific solution, based on soil conditions, and also one of the things that we learn based on limited resources is that we can do a lot by employing outreach and training. And so when we are saying community-driven solution, we are actually saying that outreach and training, it is indeed so important for moving forward, is to learn about applicable requirements, to learn about best management practices, to learn about compliance, to learn about best management practices, to design, construct, operate, and maintain septic systems.
Okay, helpful, very, very helpful. Thank you so much. So it sounds to me like although there may be very specific peculiarities unique to the islands in the Caribbean, that certainly on the process side of things, engaging in partners, looking for community-driven solutions, those are basic lessons learned that would be applicable more broadly. And you know, I got that from Sonia's presentation on her experience with Connecticut. So you know, I guess the good news is we're starting to get pretty good at these things as we sort of walk through more of these experiences. My hope would be that we're able to sort of share the lessons learned so that we can continue to sort of address the challenges head on, and not just from a reactive standpoint, but from a proactive standpoint. And toward that end, I would happily plug the resources that NEHA will be providing by the end of this month. I have a question for Ayana, if you're still around. You had mentioned under your wildfire preparedness portion of your presentation a particular app, but I didn't get the name, and I didn't know what the gist of it was, and how we might be able to find out more about it. I think you said something about CAL FIRE.
Yeah, it's the CAL FIRE app. Allison, are you on the line? Is there?
Can you spell that?
Yes, it's CAL FIRE FIRE, and then it's the app, and so it just prepares. It gives like practical advice and tips on how to prepare for wildfires, specifically in California. So it's like a small mini emergency supply kit, and it provides evacuation information as well. And so, yeah, you can find it like on Apple or, your Android device, and download the app. But it's specifically for the state of California.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, David, I'm not seeing any questions come in. Oh, wait, I think we just got one. I can't read the question, David.
Yep, we got two. Yep, I can relay it. One question was, can we get a certificate of attendance? Is that possible, John?
So that is something that has been offered by EPA.
And the second question was,
Academy. So what I was going to say is, I don't know if there's a way to do it, but if you need hours, go ahead and write me at waye.don at epa.gov, and I can verify. We have a list of attendees, so I can verify and send it on to you, but it's nothing official.
And Don, I would like to. This is Joel, and I would like to ask the audience. So please send us an email with your lesson learned, your ideas for moving forward with respect to septic systems within your jurisdiction. We would like to know about it. We would like to learn about it, and we would like to work with you as well.
Terrific. Yeah, thanks. And I see your email and Paul's email are on the screen right now. Again, so this, I'll go ahead and, well, when we're ready, we can talk about the archiving, but this webcast will be archived. You'll hear a little bit more about that at the end. But did you say there was another question, David?
Yes, there was. The next question was, are SRF resources generally available to on-site system owners for installation repair after disasters?
So
Can you repeat the question again,
the
David?
state revolving fund. So I'm looking at the question now, and it says, are SRF resources generally available to on-site system owners for installation repair after a disaster? And what the questioner is asking about is the state revolving fund. EPA has two state revolving funds, one for Clean Water State Revolving Fund and one for Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And these are operated at the state level. There are some general federal guidelines, but at the federal level, there are not restrictions that would prohibit states from using their own Clean Water SRF Revolving Fund funds to address septic systems or decentralized systems. But at the state level, often there are obstacles to that. Some states do, some states don't. So you have to check with your state. EPA is actually working on, right now, a guide for how states can start to move in that direction, to use more SRF resources to address problems from decentralized systems. Generally, it's been another matter to address them at maybe a wholesale, in a wholesale fashion at a regional sub-state level. versus an individual homeowner. It tends to be harder for individual homeowners just to sort of apply it. There are models out there that some states have done. Minnesota comes to mind, for example. But look for EPA to come out, hopefully later this year, worst case early next year, with a guide on some model programs that states have done. But generally, it's been a challenge for many states to use clean water SRF dollars for this purpose. But there are other funding sources as well. Again, the need greatly outstrips the available resources for this.
Yeah. If I may add to that, Don, and this is based on the funding opportunities that have been identified specifically in Puerto Rico because of the disaster, but as you well mentioned, it may vary depending the state and the disaster proclamation. But at least in Puerto Rico right now, funds available are under the CDBG-DR funds. These are like HUD funds for recovery, and they are programs that were established by the government of Puerto Rico that will provide funds for repair, replacement, and or upgrades of septic systems. Also, the USDA Rural Development Program, they do also have money for sanitary infrastructure repairs, including decentralized systems. And those are like two that I can recall at the top of my head, in addition to the state revolving funds.
Okay, so for those who didn't get it, the CDBGR, those are HUD funds, Housing and Urban Development Funds, Community Development Block Grant funds, earmarked for recovery purposes. But in general, even where not earmarked for recovery purposes, communities have been able to, I guess there's a lot of flexibility in how those funds are used, but HUD has a lot of information on their website about community development block grants. Thanks. I'll say this, whenever EPA speaks at conferences on septic systems, the questions eventually turn to funding. Rotten tomatoes have been thrown at speakers, hopefully just figuratively, when they find out that their state doesn't use clean water SRF dollars to address needs of in the decentralized communities. But again, in most cases, the states are only limited by their imagination and their willingness to sort of use these funds. They are looking for, this is loan money. They're looking for repayment, and that it gets a little bit more challenging when you get into models that are financially sustainable to address a lot of times economically depressed areas. So at this point, David, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we just got one to clarify about the funding assistance in Puerto Rico, if the funding assistance is only offered to single-family dwelling owners. Paul or Joel able to answer that?
Yes. So it is for both. It's for multi-residential septic systems, which in Puerto Rico, in the case in Puerto Rico, those are like the fewer. But yes, most of these funds are for the individual homeowners. So the homeowners, will have to request assistance to the program that provide repairs or replacements.
And this gets at a topic that continues to come up, and which I think we've had some, EPA has had some level of outreach on in the past, even through webinars on, you know, how to finance decentralized or septic system needs. But maybe we need to keep at it. At the end of today's webcast, you will have an opportunity to tell us what you would like us to present an upcoming webinar on. So at this point, if there aren't any more questions, David, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, it appears that we have answered them all. So thank you so much. Thank you, Don, and thank you to our speakers, Ayana, Sonia, Joel, and Paul. And thank you to all that have listened into this webinar and provided feedback and questions. So at this time, I'd like to conclude today's webcast. The webcast will be archived at epa.gov/septic. If you look under the webcast links under technical resources, these archives are typically ready in a few weeks from the original webcast date, so check back in then. So you'll see, as Don mentioned, when you close the webinar, a survey will appear on your screen. It'll pop up as a pop-up. This is the audience opportunity to tell us what they thought about the webinar and topics that they'd like to see in the future for the Decentralized MOU Partnership Webinars CAS series. So thank you so much, and with that, have a great afternoon. So thank you. Take care.